Hi, my name is Gibson, and I'm the creator of the Personal Development School. This is your daily breakthrough video, and in this video, I want to talk to you a little bit about a personal share. But today, I really wanted to talk about the theme of forgiveness in my life from a personal sharing perspective. As many of you know, I had a lot of work to do on myself growing up. Went through, a lot of different traumas growing up, a lot of different experiences, things I couldn't properly emotionally process or make sense of, and struggled with addiction, and then was fearful avoidant attachment style. And really went through kind of like the darkest season of my life from about 14 years old to about 21 years old. And around 21, maybe the end of my year of being 20, I'm not sure. I really started diving into a lot of like kind of healing and trying to understand what I was going through and sort of gain access to deeper resources. And one of the big themes that came up for me a lot over and over again was forgiveness and the importance of being able to forgive. Now, forgiveness was something that I really struggled with growing up. I would hold on to grudges like it was nobody's business. And I think at a deeper level, like my subconscious mind, when I felt disempowered by some of the experiences I had had and sort of powerless to know how to respond to them or manage them, I think that my subconscious mind, by holding on to, how I was the victim in the situation and how, I was angry and how, I should be holding a grudge, by holding on to these things, I think that gave me a sense of personal power. Like, in other words, and this happens, right? Our subconscious mind will try to find strategies to get our needs met. So I think as somebody who during that season of life felt terribly disempowered, held on to grudges as a form of like protection and personal power. Like it almost made me feel, if I'm being honest, like empowered that I had a grudge, like serves you right kind of thing, right? Like almost like a spitefulness. And I did that with a lot of people in my life in a lot of circumstances. And then of course, beginning my journey into sort of personal growth and development, came across that like old quote that I'm sure everybody's heard. And it talks about how holding on to resentment is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. And that resonated with me. I got that. And I sort of started taking inventory because I was like, okay, I hear that, but let me really take a look. And at some point in time, as I was sort of beginning my healing journey, I got like pretty into journaling, and I journaled out like all the ways that holding onto a grudge hurt me and all the ways that the lack of forgiveness really hurt me in my own life. And one of the biggest things that I realized is that whatever I hadn't forgiven from the past, I was carrying as an assumption of what would happen in my future. And I really realized that, so for example, if I saw, breaching of trust or loyalty, or, I would carry that with me. I would assume that every single person that I was ever going to be in a relationship with would follow those same sort of patterns. And I realized like how much that was exhausting me at a really real level, and how much weight there was in carrying that assumption. And I realized like anything that I hadn't forgiven, I was still carrying with me in that format, almost assuming like, oh, the next person's going to hurt me this way, or my next relationship is going to be like this. And I realized like how painful that was for me. And then I started wondering, like, how do you actually forgive? So basically, as a first note, and this is a very valuable exercise to do, is to actually sit down and make a list of the things you haven't forgiven, and almost like in a column next to it, write out all the ways those experiences, because you're still holding on to them so tightly. That's what it is, right? Whatever we haven't forgiven, we're still holding on to so tight. All the ways those things are affecting your life now. And when you really take time to reflect on that and do the work on that for a moment, it's like a little bit earth shattering. Like you sort of are like, oh my goodness. At least that was my experience at the time. I was like, oh my gosh, like I'm carrying like all of this weight, like all of this pain with me everywhere and projecting it onto everybody and everything around me. And so it was really powerful to kind of look at it from that lens. And then I started wondering like, okay, well, how do I forgive? Like, how do I actually get to the point of forgiving? because it's easy to say like I forgive, but I didn't emotionally feel that a lot of the time. So I would, be like, okay, I'm going to forgive this person, or oh, it's fine, I forgive them. Or even sometimes as I was like kind of starting off my healing journey, I would even say to somebody like, oh, I forgive you, over something small. But then I would kind of reflect later and realize like I said that, but I wasn't there with it. Like I didn't really mean it. I wasn't behind it. And that just felt worse. It kind of just felt like more of a self-betrayal at that point. And so I started researching a lot on forgiveness. And I heard this quote, and I can't remember exactly how the quote went, but I read it somewhere or something. And it was talking about how true forgiveness is like fixing an imbalanced perception. And this was really powerful for me because I started being like, okay, so what's the imbalanced perception? And I realized what happens is when I'm holding on really tightly to things I haven't forgiven, number one, I'm focusing on all the negatives and I'm never seeing like if there was a silver lining in that experience. And number two, I have all these stories about myself because of that event that I'm still carrying with me, like I said earlier, and haven't corrected yet. So a big example that's more personal is I was in a really serious relationship growing up when I was really, really young or fairly young. And I got married really young. And in this relationship, it was sort of a complicated situation as to why and sort of what was going on. But got into that sort of situation and then was cheated on and found out about it and, firsthand and all these different things. And I was really holding on to that for a while. Like I was really like, oh, okay, like trust nobody ever kind of thing from that. And I realized like that's not serving me. It's not serving me to build relationships with people, not even friendships. It's not serving me in my family relationships, probably won't serve me in my future romantic relationships. But even worse than that, I carried this story all the time of like, oh, was I not worthy? Was I not good enough? What did I do wrong? Was it my fault? Like all these sorts of dynamics. And I realized like how painful that really was. And so what I did is I try to be like, okay, how can I rebalance this perception? By the way, I'll take you through this exercise here for a second. But if you actually are struggling with like true forgiveness and like the difference between intellectualizing forgiveness and like getting to true forgiveness, there's a whole course we have on this you can check out for free below that you can for sure get through in 7 days. And you have a 7-day free trial. It's called Releasing Resentment and Learning to Truly Forgive. I actually think, on a side note, that like learning forgiveness is like one of the most important things in a person's healing journey, period. And I also think that what we haven't forgiven and made peace with, it doesn't mean that you don't have boundaries if they're necessary, but what you haven't forgiven and made peace with your parents is likely going to show up in so many of your romantic relationships throughout the course of your life. I think that's a very important, because remember, your adult romantic relationship replaces your primary attachment figure of your parents or caregivers growing up. So there's this big link, right? And what we're carrying with us is these stories become our expectations. And then whatever that subconscious comfort zone is of what we believe our expectations to be will be what we're drawn to in other people. So anyways, going back to this for a moment. So I sort of got to this place of going, okay, so like, what is it costing me to not forgive? And kind of realizing, and also realizing that I kind of had this story about that really came up as like fear within me, like getting close to people was scary after that for quite some time. And being vulnerable to people was even more terrifying, because it's like, oh, what, I'm going to be vulnerable to people and then like feel like that all over again after what had happened. Like, I'm just gonna, like, I don't want to feel like that. I don't really want to go in that situation or direction. And so what I ended up doing is being like, okay, well, how do I actually get to a place where it feels safe to forgive? And that's one of the tricky things. So the first thing is you can look at the cost, right? Like we talked about earlier. The second thing is sometimes we use a lack of forgiveness as a means of setting a boundary. So sometimes if we don't trust ourselves yet to like be good with our boundaries naturally or speak up for our needs or things like that, then we'll hold on to that grudge. We'll hold on to that anger as a means of like keeping ourselves safe, right? So for me, because I didn't think it was safe to be vulnerable at that time, I kept being like, oh, well, I'll just keep this huge barrier up, this huge, like, don't let anybody near me at a true level, sort of wall up. And that was my way of like not having to feel like that again, not having to feel betrayed and let down and like I was vulnerable and then something really bad happened. And it was my way of like keeping myself safe, right? Keeping, things under control, feeling like I could trust myself and my environment. But really, when I looked a lot more deeply into it, I realized I wasn't good with boundaries. At the time, I wasn't good at communicating my needs. I was totally overgiving and under receiving and like overcompensating in my life because I had this inherent sense of unworthiness. And so I kept trying to, put myself in these situations or positions where I was actually betraying myself. And that was going to put me, as what I believed at the time, is that that was going to put me at, as like a match to situations where I would be betrayed. And I've seen that with people over and over and over again. And my theory behind that is like, when we're constantly betraying ourselves, our subconscious mind is gathering so much more information every second than ever makes it to our conscious mind. And when we're in a state of self-betrayal with poor boundaries and not expressing our needs and overextending ourselves and not allowing ourselves to receive in return and have a healthy exchange of energy from people around us, well, then that's our subconscious comfort zone. So we're actually drawn to people who will keep that alive with us. And so we're drawn to people who are going to end up, co-creating a repetition of those patterns with us. So if you're constantly in self-betrayal, you're more likely to be betrayed. So anyways, that's its sort of second note. But I realized this whole, this was through a lot of like meditation. This was through a lot of self-reflection. I went really intensely into a lot of these different concepts and ideas and read tons and tons and tons of books. And I was in school at the time and, taking certifications on the side. Like I was really like gung ho into all this stuff, but I came to sort of put these pieces together. And then I realized, okay, so I have to correct that root problem of feeling empowered to set my boundaries and to speak up, and take those sort of golden nuggets away from the experience as a means of then feeling like it's actually safe to be vulnerable because I trust myself to be vulnerable, but also to share my truth, to set a boundary if something's not comfortable, to allow myself to have needs in relationships and to receive them, and to speak up if I feel like they're not being met, and to actually like allow myself to just feel worthy enough to take up space and just treat myself accordingly. So this was really powerful in terms of like realizations to have. And then I sort of realized, hey, forgiveness doesn't feel so scary anymore when I get to that point. And if I can sort of practice correcting that root level and stopping the self-betrayal, then like, even if somebody else betrays me, it doesn't feel so scary because like, I'm okay on my own. Like I'll find another relationship where I can communicate my needs and things like that. So then I started looking at like, okay, let me correct that imbalance of perception. Remember I told you I saw this thing about how when we lack forgiveness, we haven't like balanced that perception yet. And so I started trying to figure out like, okay, so this painful thing that happened, what was the upside of it? And that's a hard question to ask when you're hurt, right? That's a hard question to ask when you're carrying this story about you and that it's unfair and that it's an injustice because you tried or put your heart into something. But at the end of the day, I also just wanted to grow. I just wanted to heal. And so I was willing to look at least and to honestly look. And I realized like, oh my gosh, all these things weren't working in that relationship. I was repeating all these painful patterns. I wasn't growing. That relationship was stunting my growth. I'm starting to find myself because I got out of this relationship. And, I'm not saying anything negative about that person at all. That person was a kind person with a good heart, but also had their own traumas and pain points. And we just didn't know at a young age how to like mesh, and like figure it out kind of thing. But I really realized like, oh my gosh, like as painful as it was to break up from this relationship, this is exactly what allowed me to start learning about myself, start figuring out like, hey, I'm sick of feeling bad all the time. I'm sick and tired of feeling sick and tired. And I don't have somebody to focus on in this codependent manner where I'm going to keep ignoring myself and prioritizing somebody else. And I learned about myself and I started healing and I started learning all these lessons and I started seeing like all these benefits that were coming out of this painful experience that I was holding on to and not forgiving. And as I started doing that, I could feel forgiveness actually happening. I could feel like it wasn't like I was trying to convince myself I've forgiven or just say I've forgiven to sound like I'm on some growth journey. I was feeling the forgiveness at a deep level and it was reaching my subconscious mind is what I've come to learn later on. And so I kept looking, what are the benefits? And then I started going into, this is sort of the fourth major part, the stories I had like about myself, like, oh, because I was betrayed, because I was cheated on, this means that I'm not worthy, not good enough. And I started to really question those stories and really asking myself, like, could it be something other than this? What else could it be? and realizing like, oh, it could be that like we weren't compatible, that things weren't working, that that person had their own traumas and wounds, that we weren't meeting each other's needs for a very long time because we were having a really big pain points in communication and didn't know how to be vulnerable. I had all these walls up in my own way. I was constantly pushing this person away. And hey, if you get pushed away enough, like people are going to start reacting. And, it wasn't me like blaming myself in any way, but rather than like totally blaming the other person and not seeing my own part so I could heal from it, learn from it, acknowledge it, grow from it in the future, not repeat the same patterns again, right? Like there's this old quote, I see it on the internet all the time, and it's like evolve or repeat. So like evolve or repeat. And in my opinion, and in the opinion of working with so many people over the years, I believe this to be a truth. Like we tend to repeat patterns over and over again, and we don't seem to recognize that they're happening because we're looking at the external world, right? And we're not looking at our internal world. And that's what's on repeat, right? The same thoughts, the same relationship to our boundaries. Oh, the person changed on the outside, the situation changed on the outside, but I'm feeling the same way. I'm thinking the same types of thoughts. I have the same beliefs activated that I'm not good enough or not worthy or not safe or can't trust or whatever it might be. And yeah, the external world changes, but my internal world's just on a repeat. And I started realizing that, and how that relationship actually had all these sort of like parallels to past experiences I had gone through in different forms. And so really like digging into that and taking away those lessons and seeing the benefits and the silver lining in things. And then also changing the story that I had, that it was, oh, me, and it was only me. And it's because I'm not worthy, or I'm not good enough in some way that this happened, and challenging that, truly being willing to challenge that and get out of that comfort zone, get out of that like subconscious space of just believing those same things. This was how I started feeling like real forgiveness. And this started like a big forgiveness journey for me. This started me doing a lot of work on a lot of people and experiences and things that I hadn't resolved. And it allowed me to see my part in things. It allowed me to feel so much relief. Like I can't tell you how much relief I felt from like going down like a forgiveness journey, and how much lighter I felt every day, how much more comfortable and safe I felt connecting with people, how much I was able to lower my guard with people, and still know that like if something happened and I wasn't okay with it, I could trust myself to set a boundary, trust myself to speak up and move in a different direction if needed. And being vulnerable wasn't so scary any longer. And so I think that, doing that forgiveness work and doing the work on why we're scared to forgive and what boundaries we may lack, or where we may still be betraying ourselves, and then really changing those stories and looking for the benefits, those are really key components towards not just forgiving intellectually, but being able to really forgive sort of from your heart. So anyways, I have a whole course based on this. Basically all of PDS is just a whole bunch of lessons I learned, and then certifications and schooling I did that allowed me to kind of like make sense of it in a theoretical way from like some of the personal and emotional things I was moving through, and how much they were helping and serving, and sort of bridging those gaps of like personal journey and experiences, and then like, oh, what's happening at the subconscious level of mind, and how do you put this into practical steps from a reprogramming perspective, or what's happening psychologically, and understanding the psyche and sort of bridging those gaps. But hopefully this video helps. And let me know if you have any other questions, and thank you so much for watching. And please subscribe to this channel if you haven't already. Thank you.